Hello, everyone. Hope you're coming in just fine. Wherever you are in the world, hope you have a good night or a good morning or a good afternoon when you're joining us for this amazing event. Well, today is the third session, but the beginning of this session, which is local food to survive and thrive. My name is Thais Mantovani. I'm also part of the Feminine Futures movement, out of the local futures movement as well. My session will be next. And I'm super glad to be here with Anja, helping her facilitate this session today. We are longtime friends. We have seen each other in a few events around local futures. We have been together last year, which is where this amazing movement started around feminine futures, discussing about what is feminine futures beyond being a woman, but the feminine in the world that needs to be more activated and looked upon as this space of active hope of change, right? That we can learn so much. So I'm really happy to be the mediator tonight. It was going to be a about 90-minute session. We're going to have questions in the chat. So first, the questions will be in the Q&A. So if you have specific questions for Anja while she speaks, it will be in the Q&A box. So please direct your questions there. And in the chat, we will be chatting about yourselves, chatting about what Anja brings. And the first thing we want to do in the chat right now is to introduce yourselves. So let us know who you are, where do you come from, how did you get to know the Feminine Future webinar series, and if you work in any local project, just let us know as well. So we want to know and get to know a bit of yourself. I will be in the chat mediating and answering all of you and getting to know all of you while Anja shares a bit of her wisdom with us. So Anja is an international food and local food and localization specialist and activist. And I'm so happy to be here with her right now discussing about local food and localization, which is a movement she has been working most of her life dedicated to. So Anja, I will pass the speaking stick for you so that you can bring us and enlighten us with all that you have studied and worked. And please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box and in the chat. If you have any technological issues, Marjana is here with us, and you can also direct the questions in the chat for us.
Thank you, Thais. Thanks you for your help. And so far, it's been great fun with our Feminine Futures experiences together. So I just want to say a little bit about myself and how I came to believe, which I do, believe that local food is one of the most important areas that we can engage with and further. And I, at the age of 14, like so many other young people, were thinking about what am I going to do with my life? And I had an experience where I went to visit some people with my family that were growing their own food, building their own houses. And it gave me an opportunity to see what it's like behind the scenes. In a way, I had never thought, I came from sort of a fairly urban background and had never sort of considered food in my life, where it came from or anything. So this experience sort of made me think that, you know, of all the things I could do, food seemed the most important, the one thing that we as human beings can't do without. We can do without books and certainly without the internet. We can do a lot of things, but we can't do without food. And that became kind of the red thread throughout my life. And they took me into first a vocational training around agriculture and horticulture. And then a little later in life, when I was 21, I had the opportunity to go to Ladakh in India, in the Himalayas. And there I kind of had another input that also changed the direction of my life. where I sort of was seeing this agricultural society where people had been growing food in what is basically a stone desert for millennia without degrading the environment. That is very much to do with the sort of integrated farming, the use of human manure, compost toilets, very careful management of human resources, and very much living within ecological limits. So that set me going, realizing it's not just about, you know, producing food, it's about how we produce food, and very importantly, how we care for the land, which also means caring for each other. And that took me years later, a few years later, to the university, where I had like another development in my thinking, where I realized, okay, it's not only about food production, because I was aware of the local, the organic food movement, which at that time was you know, very genuine. It hadn't sort of been co-opted in many areas as we see today by big companies. It was generally people caring for the land, and, you know, but then I thought, it's not just food production, it's also how we distribute our food. Who are we producing for? So then I started in university to specialize in what today is sort of come under the label of local food. And I did my research on local food systems. This was in the UK. And I was fortunate enough to come across the first community supported agriculture project in the whole of the UK, where a family that had shifted from selling their produce in a supermarket chain to selling directly to consumers. And that's what local consumers within a radius of 15 kilometers. It was quite amazing. And then, so over the years, I've been working with small and family farms and farming cooperatives and associations in different parts of the world, including in Mexico, where I now live most of the time in a small eco-village. And one of the things I'm stuck with is when I moved there, I lived, first of all, with my parents-in-law, together with my Mexican husband. And I saw there kind of the impact on the local economy. Very symbolically, my parents-in-law had this little wooden chest by the door, and they would be selling their own produce. They'd be selling cheese, milk, firewood, fruit in season, mangoes, lemons, what have you. And people knock on the door, or they would also sell meat at times if they slaughtered a sheep or something. And people come to the door, get their produce, and the money would go into the little wooden box. Well, all through the day, there would be a stream of people also knocking on the door to sell things. And they would be people that would bring fresh shrimp, fish, homemade chocolate, flowers, bread, tamales, and the money would go out of the box. The money that had come in would go out of the box. And this, you know, very kind of mental picture, I'm still stuck with that today, because it just showed how this money was circulating within the local economy, giving rise to really dignified livelihoods for people locally, and to the production base that enabled local fisher folk, local producers of maize, of meat, of dairy, and, you know, really supporting a place-based economy. And I think that that is probably the way most cultures in this world have been working for millennia. And sort of that is what I carry with me when I think about local food systems and the importance of that. But I will be talking today about a whole series of different specific initiatives that are helping to strengthen our food systems in different parts of the world. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the dominant economy that we are now faced with, and kind of what we need to do so that local food becomes more of a macro trend. So I'm going to be showing a slideshow because I think some imagery here can help us. And we should have ample time, hopefully about 40 minutes for questions and comments. And any questions that you may have on the way, just pop them into the Q&A box, right? So maybe if you can allow me to share my screen, just to start off with, to get a sense where we are at with this, what I call mad economy. I'm going to put basically some questions here, a bit rhetorical really, but just to illustrate what we are faced with today. So here is like cod. How far does cod travel if it's caught 50 kilometers from the coast of Scotland? How far does it travel before it reaches Scottish consumers? Here there are three options. Unfortunately, I can't see what you write in the chat box, but Thais, you will be able to. What do you think? Would it be traveling 150 kilometers or more than 2,000 or 10,000 kilometers? Any guesses? Well,
we have a guess here of 2,000 kilometers, 2,382 kilometers to be precise, from Sylvia. A few people betting on option C.
Yeah, well, sadly is option C. The option C, because most of the fish goes from Scotland to China to get filleted or cleaned up, and then it's sent back again. Now, that's a very, very common scenario in the global economy. I'll talk a little bit about why that is soon. And let me just see. We've got another one from Spain. You know, you may know that Spain is the biggest producers of oranges in the EU. But where do the oranges that they consume come from? Would it be Spain? Would it be South Africa? Or would it be Morocco?
So most guesses now are coming from Spain. Oh, sorry, from South Africa. Maybe Spain as well. So maybe a doubt between A and 2, but most people betting on B.
Yeah. And of course, the logical answer would be Spain. But in an illogical economy, the answer here is actually South Africa. And most of the Spanish oranges are exported to the US, to other countries in the EU, and the orange that they consume come all the way from South Africa. And then here's another question, the last one. Globally, what is the level of subsidies that to industrial agriculture on average per year? So here I've got three options: $1 million per month, $1 million per day, $1 million per minute.
Okay, so we have a few bets on answer C, $1 million per minute. A few people betting on B as well, $1 million a day, but mostly going for C.
Yeah, and of course, sadly, that's the truth. So that's the on average, $1 million per day. I mean, it should be no surprise to anybody that if the industrial food is the cheapest that we find in the shop, because it's the most heavily subsidized. And in comparison, 1% of that goes to what we could refer to as regenerative farming or agroecological organic. So obviously, the healthy farming that we need, that's friendly to the environment, that's friendly to the farmers, is the one that gets the least support, which is why that local food produced around the corner in an environmental friendly way tends to be more expensive. It's not because it's elitist, it's because the industrial food is heavily subsidized. And so that's the kind of the reality that we are faced with. And it's the reality that's, you know, politically designed. It's man-made. We shouldn't get stuck on the idea that everything is hopeless, because it's man-made and it can be remade. But I want to point to this kind of the pillars or the key mechanisms in this global corporate economy. And number one are the so-called free trade treaties. Number two are the subsidies, which I just mentioned, but it's not just the agricultural subsidies. It's also other types of subsidies and taxes, which are often used, and indirect subsidies, either to penalize someone, which usually is the small and the local, will generally pay more taxes and be over-regulated, whereas the big and the global, they'll get subsidies, they don't have to pay taxes hardly, and they get the carpet rolled out and the doors open, and they become deregulated. So that's an unlevel playing field that we are faced with today. And in terms of subsidies, I'm sure most of you and most of us are aware of by now the heavy subsidies that have gone to the fossil fuel industries over the years. And I think it was only in the very last climate summit where subsidies were mentioned. In all the other climate summits, subsidies to fossil fuel industry have never been mentioned. So even after COVID, where if you remember during COVID, where there were a lot less international movements of goods and travel, we still had a rise in the subsidies that went to the fossil fuel companies. So in 2023, it was up to $7 trillion. No? That is what has enabled this totally mad economy of movements of goods around the world, because of this heavily subsidized fossil fuels, and also because many countries operate with export subsidies that facilitate and enable what we, artificially cheap goods. And of course, then there are the agricultural subsidies I mentioned before. And when it comes to the free trade treaties, the free trade treaties have basically a way to deregulate in favor of big corporations. It's very much the sort of the key feature of the kind of economic growth mantra that we hear all politicians mentions. Almost doesn't matter on which end of the political scale that they find themselves. As you probably know, these treaties are negotiated in secret, closed doors, no civil societies involved. They're designed by and for corporations, and trade is put above the well-being of people and the health of the planet. So that's, what have enabled this absolutely mad and redundant trade. As you can see here, there's a lot of redundant trade where countries import and export the same amount of goods, the same amount of food, is not something that benefits people. It's something that benefits private corporation, basically, because food has been become subject to a speculative economy, and basically been reduced to commodities. And here are some examples with avocados, beef, even water that are crisscrossing the world. Is also not just food, it's coal, it's steel, it's all sorts of products. And the trade treaties, I'll just mention one, which you probably heard about, NAFTA, that came into being in 1994. It was at the time the sort of most comprehensive trade treaty. And at the time, it was also the one that was giving most concessions to large corporations. And Mexico, where I lived for most of my time, have really suffered from the consequences of NAFTA, which enabled huge amount of corn that was heavily subsidized from the US to flood the Mexican market, which basically put local producers, farmers all over Mexico, out of business. They lost their livelihoods. It gave rise to migration from country to cities, to the US, and in other places. So at the same time, it opened up for the likes of Walmart that spread across the country, outcompeted again, because very heavily subsidized local shops and businesses, the rise in junk food. Now Mexican can boast of being the #1 consumer of soft drinks and the #1 with the highest level of diabetes in terms of inhabitants. And that's is a picture you can see in many places. It's like the free trade is not really benefiting anyone else but private corporation and distant shareholders. And it's not just Mexico. Small producers worldwide are losing out in this game. Here you can see from the US the decrease in the food dollar received by the farmers. So when people go and shop for $1 in 1910, farmers would get 40% of that. In 22, not even 8%. It's a little bit better in my native Denmark, but still not very good. 27% of the money goes to farmers. And why? Because the distribution system is super centralized, and they can pit farmers against farmers and push down the prices in this global market. And so they are losing out, the small and the family farmers, even the medium-sized farmers across the world. And of course, there's also been a concentration of power in other parts of the food systems, in the retail sector, with the seeds, with the agrochemicals. It's all becoming a bigger and bigger market share to a very small number of very large corporations. And the part of, some of you may have heard of ISDS, which is a clause that's written into most free trade treaties. It refers to a very boring title of investor-state dispute settlements, which basically means that a corporation can sue the government if they don't get the profit that they expect from some investment. It's called if they lose out on foregone profit. To date, there have been 1,400 cases or thereabouts of private corporations suing government. And they do that through different free trade treaties or the WTO. Most of those companies are from heavily industrialized countries, and many of them are suing governments in parts of the world like Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And I was just reading today in the Guardian newspaper that governments have paid $92 billion of public money to fossil fuel and mining companies that have sued them. And they are very much increasingly back these cases by financial speculators. So they are looking at which governments can we sue, how much money can we get, and they get a proportion of that money. And typically, corporations sue if governments, for example, go in and protect the environment, protect people from pollution or what have you, or and that's when they go in and say, okay, you are restricting my ability to have limitless profits, and therefore I'm going to sue you. And about 62% of the cases come out in favor of the corporations. And even when they don't, they have what is called a chilling effect on progressive legislation, because governments are basically afraid of protecting people or protecting the environment in case they get sued. So there's a lot of opposition to it from the grassroots in particular. It's not like people are keeping quiet, but it's something we're hearing more about it now, but for years and years, it wasn't common knowledge. And people hadn't pinpointed that the free trade treaties and the ISDS as something that we really need to change if we want to have a systemic shift. And La Via Campesina, you may have heard about La Via Campesina. If not, you should take note of it, because it is the biggest movement, farmers, peasant movement in the whole world. It represents over 200 million small farmers and peasants from, I don't know how many countries, but they're, 180 organizations, networks, movements. And they are the voice of small farmers. They promote food sovereignty, and they are in opposition to free trade treaties and corporate control, agrochemicals, and GMOs. And they're for agroecology, and they are for local food systems. And they are really a voice to be reckoned with. Unfortunately, you don't hear hardly anything about them in the mainstream press. So we need to do what we can to share about it. So now I want to talk about the change of direction towards stronger local economies and food systems. And also, I see, as we localize, we also diversify, and we have an opportunity to strengthen our local cultures rather than global corporations and monoculture that comes with that global consumerism, right? So economic localization is about shortening the distances between producers and consumers. And as you do that and build up more place-based economies, you also get diversified production. When you produce for local and regional use, you're more likely to diversify as compared with when the production is focused on export, where it's often monoculture. And it's also very much about reducing corporate power and strengthening self-reliance at the same time. In order to do that, we need to use some of those mechanisms I just explained about to support people, local economies, the planet, rather than transnational and distant shareholders. And to do so, we need to re-regulate. We need to think about re-regulating banks and businesses so they become subject to democratic control and ecological limits. Now, that seems a really difficult thing to do, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's something we need to have in focus as a kind of demand of where do we want to go for the future. Even if we can't think of a way of doing it right now, we need to know that we have to do it, because otherwise we don't have the control to make that change when the whole system are pushing us in the other direction. So one of the principle of localization that is the principle of subsidiarity. I don't know if you've heard about that. it's a principle of where like the social and political issues should be addressed at the most immediate level, or the kind of local level, consistent with their resolution. And I think that's really, really key in our, when we strategize about how we can do it. So in terms of production, imagine, you know, often when we talk about local food, we would expect that something like vegetables and fruit is something we can meet those needs fairly close by, certainly within probably 50 kilometers in most places. When it comes to something like grain, we might have to go a bit further away, maybe like 100 kilometers. Cooking oil, perhaps a little bit further. When it then comes to industrial products, yes, we might need to meet those needs on a national or a international scale. And when it comes then to some sort of extra exotics like chocolate or coffee, you know, we're talking international trade. But basically, we're sort of turning things on its head from what it is now, where often we are meeting our needs very far from home. And with localization, we are looking to at least meet basic needs close to home, which is what human beings have done over millennia. We have always traded, but we haven't depended entirely for our basic needs from a global market. And that, when we do that, it puts us in a very precarious situation that can easily go wrong, which we saw during COVID, or that we see, for example, when there's a climate crisis or something, you know, food quickly dries up in the shops, and if we are dependent on long distance supply chains, then we don't have food security. And one of the ways that we can shift a local food system or strengthen local food system is through something called community wealth building. I don't know if you know about that concept, but in the UK, there's something known as the Preston model, which is a place. In the US, Cleveland model from Ohio, and it's about strengthen the local economy through public procurement. So, for example, in Preston, in the UK, they have committed to shifting part of the purchasing to local institutions, worker cooperatives, to keep the money within the economy rather than giving it away to some big, often even multinational service providers, where the money leave the community. And so the public procurement, using public procurement, basically using the money you have to buy for public institutions, and using that money in support of local businesses, sustainable businesses and producers, is a very quick way that we can redirect some funds and help strengthen our local food system in this case. Someone that have done that for a long time, or a place where they've done that quite successfully, is in Milan in Italy. And they have a food policy plan that's very progressive. They are, as you can see here, 100% organic in nurseries and a bit less in other institutions, but they've also focused on trying to meet as much as they can locally. In this case, it's 25% and 57% from what they call short distribution chains, so more regional. No? And in Denmark, where I'm from here originally, we have something similar in Copenhagen, in our capital that has also focused on for quite a while on using money for the government institutions to buy organic food. They haven't focused on the locally. The initial motivation was that around Copenhagen, there was the groundwater was heavily polluted with agrochemicals. So they thought, well, one of the ways of dealing with this would be to shift to organic. They're providing 100,000 meals a day, 90% is organic, and now they are looking for to create partnerships with local producers, and they want to try to make the tenders accessible to small and medium-sized farmers. So that could be really exciting. There's also something called you probably heard from the term farm to table or farm to fork movement. There's also a movement called farm to hospitals. So where individual hospitals in different parts of the world, here, 2 examples from the US, are looking to buy directly from farmers so that they can have healthy, fresh food served at the hospitals. They're looking at the food as part of the healing process and as food as a medicine as well. So that's also something to look out for. And also, I want to mention these territorial food projects from France, which I think are super inspiring. There are about 86 of them all over France. And they are like food plans that are drawn up to support local farmers, sustainable production, and shorter and more local supply chains. And one of the most iconic ones that have been inspiring a lot of people is one in the Montsatois, which is a town with about 10,000 people in France. And they have come up with a plan where they are using, again, the public money for the schools to buy organic and local produce. So they were very much motivated by, they wanted to avoid pesticides in food. They wanted to protect the health of the children. That was, what got them started off. And therefore they said, okay, it has to be 100% organic because that's the only way we can guarantee there will be no pesticides in the food. And then they thought, well, why not try to meet that locally? And they got local farmers involved, and they also even set up a farm themselves on some abandoned land because they couldn't get enough food locally. And now 70% of the food is local, 100% is organic. And they've also made food growing part of the school's curriculum, so that the children are involved in food growing and harvesting. And so they've done kind of public education that included the schools, but also the parents and the community at large. So it's been quite I think, groundbreaking work, you could say, and very, very holistic. Sorry. Yeah. So I wanted to mention this initiative or collaboration from Brazil. I'm not personally familiar with it, but I've heard quite a lot about it. And I was just talking to Thais, who's from Brazil, about it previously, because it's such quite amazing that you got 13 workers' unions, 150 community associations representing 5,000 families and their land. And they've got a regional organic farmers association. They focus on agroecology, health and nutrition, local supply chains. And I also really like that they are bringing in rural youth. And because there are so many, they have a bit of a political voice. Thais, you were also saying something about another network organization that you wanted to highlight. Can you say something about that before I move on to another region in the world?
Sure, sure. Well, I think lots of agroecological movements, local movements in Brazil, and the bigger ones that I would share about is the MST, which is a national-wide movement working towards political rights and regaining back lands and moving towards a more just land reform. And doing that by occupying the land and working with regenerative farming and growing in families and communities. And there's also another one, which is also a national-wide network, which is called Teia dos Povos, which is kind of the networks of the people. And it unites many different types of farmers. So indigenous farmers, local farmers from small countryside communities, and creates an environment for them to share hope and have a political voice when stronger together. I will share a bit like their links on the chat as well. And please feel free to also share other projects. We will have a moment for that, but if you want to share projects that you know, we are here chatting on the chat, and it's a wonderful conversation, Anja, but we are listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, please share any inspiring or worthwhile local food initiatives that you know about, because we at Local Future would very much like to follow up about it. We're always keen to learn about new initiatives and strategies. So I just wanted to mention some of the, which I think is a very good strategy, some of the consumer cooperatives that have emerged over the years in different parts of the world. I think the first one was in the Saikatsu Club. I'm sure many of you have heard about it because it started back in the 1960s. It was a housewife that was looking to get cheaper milk, so started buying directly from local farmers. Now, that grew to include 420,000 families all over Japan, and they were kind of organized in clubs, buying from local producers. So consumer cooperatives buying from producer cooperatives. They have also both a social vision and an ecological vision, and because it's such a big movement, they've also had a big influence in Japan. And what I've been told is that if it hadn't been for the Saikatsu Club and others that have come after, inspired by this, the small farmer in Japan would not have survived. And probably a lot of people in the cities wouldn't have benefited from healthy, fresh food. And we have something similar in South Korea. I imagine that it's been inspired by the Saikatsu Club. It's called Hansalim. It's an association of 20 regional cooperatives, and they are consumer and producer cooperative. They sell organic food, not only food, they actually also sell health product, cosmetics and other things, but they're very much focused on ecology, direct marketing. And because, again, it's a movement, they also have a political voice, and they can campaign on a lot of other things, for protecting the environment, for well-being, for welfare, for a regeneration of local communities, which is their absolute top priority. So I would really urge you to go and look, if you have time, and learn more about it, because it's very, very inspiring. And in Denmark, we were also inspired by Japan. And we have a consumer cooperative in Copenhagen with about 3,000 members that also buy from local producers in season. And it's also has that community growing element. It's not just about buying the food at reasonable prices without middlemen, which of course benefits the consumers, it benefits the producers, but it's also about building community. So people, might get together and eat and celebrate local food in its entirety and its ability to bring people together. And that in turn has inspired other consumer cooperatives around Denmark. So there are about 21 of them now. So it just shows that even though we don't get to hear about it in the mainstream news, how these things can spread. And each one of them may look like, okay, something with a small impact. When you add all these things together, you get a real sense that we have a global movement that's growing. And not only the consumer cooperatives, but there are also quite a lot of what I'd call like sort of cooperative community shops that buy directly from local farmers, that want to provide good food to people in towns and cities at affordable prices. And this community shop in Poland is one of them. They got 5 community shops. And they started out from the very beginning with wanting to provide local healthy food, decent prices to the farmers, but they didn't want it to be like a shop for rich people. They didn't want it to be elitist. So they very much tried to keep the prices low. It's not about making a lot of money. In Portugal, we've been collaborating with this Minga cooperative. It also is centered around food, but they do a lot of other things as well. And the I'd say unusual thing about this cooperative is they are a bit like an incubator and an umbrella for lots of different local entrepreneurs, businesses that maybe couldn't make it on their own. So they, for example, they have a system whereby you can be part of it and use their they get help with the taxes and use kind of the Minga cooperative brand without you as an individual entrepreneur having to do all that on your own. And that has really been a model that they are basically advising a lot of other cooperatives in Portugal about how to do that. And here's the fun little initiative in Hungary that I just love because it's a collaboration between a number of small businesses, like a bicycle delivery company, an organic farm and garden, and an organic bakery. And all of them together make one business. So they, people can subscribe and they get, their bread, their vegetable, their veggie box brought to their door, provided by, transported by the bicycle cooperative. And together they also have an education and outreach program. So they are trying to educate people and at the same time. And then there, of course, what many of us are familiar with when we think about local food, we probably think about farmers markets. One of the ones that I found most inspiring is one from Costa Rica. I had the opportunity to interview one of the co-founders of this market. I also lived in Costa Rica, by the way, so it's something close to my heart. The Feria Verde, which is the green market, runs twice a week. They've got 2 markets a week. We've got 500 families involved that have their main income from this market. And the very interesting thing, and I think perhaps one of the most positive things with it, is that it has ensured that the younger generations, the sons and daughters of the farmers, that they want to continue in farming, because they're seeing an opportunity. There's a possibility of having a dignified livelihood and also an interesting livelihood, because you're out there with the consumers, you're selling to them directly, and there are lots of other things going on. So it's a quite progressive environment to be in. And they always aim for organic, but they have a participatory local certification scheme. So they don't have, the small producers don't have to get in and, you know, pay some hugely expensive certification in order to sell the produce there. And I want to mention a different sort. This is also a kind of farmers markets, but this network that started in France in 2011 and has spread to many countries in Europe. They started off by creating a platform online where people could, that local groups could use for people to pre-order from farmers, and then would then come and pop up somewhere and then bring the pre-ordered food. So the benefit of that was that a farmer wouldn't have to show up to sell something and not get any sales. They wouldn't be wasting their time. So this has spread, and there are now 800 groups that are sort of part of this platform. They're using the platform, people pre-order, and farmers only go to sell if they have enough orders for them to make it worthwhile. And it's usually once a week, and it can be anywhere. It's not necessarily like a fixed farmers markets, but it might happen at a barn or at a school or somewhere that's available. And this network is now aiming to have more of a voice. That's what they want to have more of a voice in order to influence EU policies in favor of small farmers and food systems. So we hope here at Local Futures that it's something we can cooperate around. It's quite interesting. And you should know, if you don't know it already, that there's something called a World Farmers Markets Coalition. And that is also growing with farmers markets from across the world that are trying to join up, also to have a voice together and strengthen each other, and also very much have a better definition of farmers markets, so that it really is a place that benefits the farmers, where there is true direct marketing, and so it doesn't get watered down and whitewashed for commercial purposes, misused. So that's really worth following too. And there are many benefits of direct marketing. Thank you, Thais. And one of them is, of course, also that the money stays within the local community much longer than compared to if we buy our food in a supermarket. No? And particularly with the direct marketing, you have the greatest benefit because the money stays much longer. But also if you buy from local independent shop, even if it's not direct marketing. There's also a lot of community-supported agriculture schemes. I mean, we know of so many where people are selling directly without middlemen, and where people subscribe and get a share, either as a box scheme or as a share of the harvest, which means that the burden of the growing and the financial burden is shared with the consumer. Omama from Finland is just one such example. And there's also initiatives that are focusing on investment, local investment in local food systems. And one of those best example is probably the Slow Money Institute from the US, which is a grassroots investment movement, very much focused on building up healthy local food systems. To date, I think they've had 5,000 local investors. $100 million have been invested, and that has benefited small farmers and businesses. And the way it's organized is that you have these investment clubs, and it's very often ordinary people that will kind of lend $100, or people that have more will lend more. And either they have very low interest loans, or they are zero interest loans. And it's very much peer-to-peer, so that you know the people you are lending to, you know that they are growing sustainably, or they're not only farmers, they're also small businesses. So this has been quite a successful way of channeling local money into strengthening local food systems, and of course building up that strengthening our food sovereignty. I think it's something that could be copied to other countries. And I'm almost done. Yeah, so at Local Futures, I mean, we always talk about big picture activism, and by that we mean the kind of rethinking the basic assumptions of the economy, resisting the corporate economy and exposing it, renewing on a local level, and sharing inspiring examples to show that another world is possible. And I feel that the focus on food and the local food movement really lends itself well to that. And it's a place where we can have huge impact, all of us, because all of us can take part in strengthening a local food system, and it tends to be something very rewarding too, both good for our bodies and minds at the same time. And I wanted to just to end here. Let me see. I wanted to mention that we have a localization action guide that's worth looking at. It's divided under different topics. There are about 146 different actions, and we will very soon have a new section that will focus on education. But it's there are a lot of examples, and they include examples, I mean, inspiring examples, but also toolkits on how to go about it, and really worth looking at. And here at the end, I also want to mention World Localization Day, which is something that we at Local Futures have created for about 4 or 5 years now. And during June, people all over the world are putting focus on localization, celebrating local economies, local communities, and above all, local food systems. So take a look at the World Localization Day website, and maybe if you feel inspired, you could join us and either join us or do something to celebrate our local food economies in June. And that's, I'll just stop sharing and stop talking.
Thank you so much, Anja. This was amazing. Okay, so to continue this collective mapping, I'm looking at you, but I'm also looking at my second screen because I'm chatting with people here.
Very good.
So there, I will share now the QR codes for our collective mapping. So this collective mapping is a platform called Mentimeter. I don't know if you guys have used it before. It's super easy. If you're not able to join here, it's fine. Just write it on the chat. I'll be presenting it now so you can have access to the QR code and the link, which I have put on the chat as well. So there you can put the link, you can write the name, the country of the project that you want to share. We have shared many on the chat, which is amazing. So if you want to add it to the collective mapping as well, great. Or if it's only on the chat, it's fine. We'll be saving the chat and also systematizing all this information. But I found it really inspiring because there is modernity movement and the way modernity works with the corporate force and the government force. And we also have this kind of in the cracks of modernity, the localization movements gaining its force and showing that it's possible. and I feel like it's not something completely alien to us, right? We have lived most of our human lives in local communities and growing local food. So it's kind of an ancestral future, like going back into learning with our ancestries and learning from our evolutional process and being in touch with modern society and the challenges that we have today, and how do we adapt and create space for things that were so important to us as humans again, right? So, and I love all the comments in the chat. I will start sharing a bit of the results here. Well, people haven't shared yet, so please enter and share a bit. I can maybe share in the end, and we'll go to questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, and I mean, also just to say that we will be sharing the chat, everything that's been going on in the chat, and we would also, you know, this mapping, we would share that as well afterwards, no?
Mm-hmm.
Send it out.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, perfect. So let's get to the questions that were answered here, that were asked here. So there was a bit of people wanting you to explain a little bit more about how something is produced on somewhere else and travels the world back and forth. So it was a question specific about the cod. So why does the cod travel from Norway to somewhere else and then it comes back? So a bit of the reasons behind. Please.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the cod example from Scotland in this case is just one of many, and the Scottish one in particular, we actually followed up with the company and asked, you know, how can you justify sending fish caught off the Scottish coast to China and back again? And their argument was, which of course is an economic one, even though they tried to dress it up as something else, was that that the Chinese are so much better at filleting fish than the Scottish. And so there was less waste, and therefore it was justified sending it all the way to China and back again. The truth is, of course, is that because fossil fuels are so subsidized, they can make more money because the salaries are lower. And it's financially viable in this mad economy to bring it all the way to China and back again. Compared to, I mean, of course, the Scottish people have been filleting fish for millennia, like we have anywhere along the coast here. So it's just purely the economy that enables what is a very wasteful and illogical practice. And we cannot continue accepting these rules that are, they're driving us to the brink of disaster and destruction. So that's, in that case, was, you know, made possible by subsidies, and that's, you know, the whole free trade concept is based around this idea, a myth, that we have a level playing field, right? So that we will excel at something that we are better at, or because we have got a better climate, and therefore it's justified. But the truth is there is no level playing field, right? In this case, there's an unlevel playing field because subsidies are given in one place that makes something artificial cheap, salaries are lower, environmental protection are also lower in many places, they differ. So we don't have a level playing field. So what happens is that we end up with a spiraling effect of the lowest common denominator. And where can you make the most money? It's where there are least restrictions, where the salary are the lowest, where there's least protection, where there are most subsidies to mask up something that is really polluting the world, and so forth. So we end up with the lowest common denominator ruling the way we do business, ruling the way we produce things, and ultimately what we end up consuming, because most people can't vote with their purse. They don't have the money. They're forced to buy the most affordable option, and that's often the option that has polluted the most because it's been subsidized the most.
Yeah, these are the hidden costs, right? The hidden costs of nature. So we're taking water out of the land, for example, to create drinks, soft drinks, and no one is calculating the costs of that as well, but also the hidden costs of transportation and everything else. So another question is, where is the EU in localization? I think you shared a bit, but if you want to share a little bit more, sorry, around regulation.
Well, okay, so with the EU, I have to say I'm not an expert on the EU. Personally, I have been very critical of the EU since it started, because it basically started as a regional free trade zone, where the objective was free movement of goods across borders for big business. So that's the way it started off. Having said that, there are initiatives now that are focused on more, maybe not so much local production, but they are sort of focused on agroecology and focused on, there are within the EU different schemes that are supporting very positive things. But I think overall, EU has been pulling in the other direction. It has, for example, as I'm sure many of you know, if you live within the EU, there are rules about open licitation. So a municipality or would have to spend its money, put out tenders to the whole of the EU, and they would be obliged, at least that's the way it has been, they would be obliged to take the cheapest, or what, the best offer, which has been defined as the cheapest, which has basically forced us out in ridiculous situation as, for example, in the hospital business, that, ambulances in Denmark would be run by, ambulances from another part of the EU that don't even speak the same language, or and very much with food, opening up for these big corporations to supply local government institutions with their food rather than supporting local farmers. So, what's, for example, there usually is like a minimum, like if you are purchasing for less than 200,000 euros, you can give that tender. You can decide whether you want to give that tender, offer that tender to local producers. But if they are bigger, then you're obliged to put it out into the open tender. So I'd say the majority of the EU are not pushing for localization, rather the opposite, but there are these micro trends where there are, you can get support for many different kinds of projects, and when they are smaller, less money, then you have more of an opportunity. So yeah, not a clear cut answer, but
No
EU
worries.
was built up around so-called free trade for bigger corporations. That's what, that's how it was born.
And people are asking if you have any other or more examples from Mexico, since you're from there, and maybe we could be even more inspired. The EU could be even more.
Yeah, actually, there's so many things going on in Mexico, and there's a quite a big network of local farmers markets. The farmers market movement in Mexico is always, almost all of them are sort of focused on organic production. So it's kind of per se. I mean, there are lots of markets that are not, but the ones that are called farmers markets very much about local, small producers, organic or agroecological. Agroecological in Mexico is a more common term. And it's also, I would say, it includes a kind of a social movement. It's more political. And so that's one example. I live next to a cooperative that's very inspiring, which is called Las Cañadas, Bosque de Niebla. And they are, I'd say they have been like educating a great part of Mexico. People come there to learn about everything from organic egg production, agroecology, biointensive farming, sustainable forestry, eco building, and so forth, and permaculture, what have you. So lots of people coming there, very inspiring, and that has kind of seeded a bit of a movement of a lot of centers that are teaching other people, which is so important in different parts, which is helping to grow a movement, sort of very much a grassroots movement around agroecology and permaculture. So that in itself is really inspiring, and there are so many initiatives that I could talk about, but for example, I could mention, not very close to us, there's a cooperative of that produces coffee, shade coffee, organic shade coffee. They have their own certification scheme, which include social goals, also goals within the family. It's not just about ecology, and is called Fem Cafe. So very much in the feminine, talking about feminine futures. It's led by women. And yeah, so there are numerous examples like that. And I would actually say that Latin America, which I'm sure, I mean, for example, Africa is too, but there is so much going on. So I'm always having a hard time picking which to share about, and I learn about new ones every single day, and that is not true. That wasn't true before, because I started in this field like 40 years ago, and I had at that time a filing cabinet with you remember these little what they call folders, you know, sorted by country. And it was very much felt like, you know, I knew everything, you know, which of course not true, but we had a sense at Local Futures that we were, you know, pretty much on top of what was going on. Well, there's no way. I mean, you hear about something new every single day, and it's what we don't get to hear about in the mainstream press. No, we're bombarded with all the bad news, and you know, paralyzed by fear in many instances. Not strange, and we really need to nurture each other with these stories, and of course sharing the strategies and the experience. That, you know, it's not easy. It's not like we've got the solution, everything is going to be okay, but there is so much going on, and it's not like we have to it's not a utopia, because it's already happening, you know, and it's already happening, and there's already like decades of experience. It's not like you know, we have to reinvent the wheel or anything. And it's just we really have to do our bit to share about it, so that people realize that it's not a pipe dream.
Perfect. And this follows up perfectly to our next question. So we have two questions here. one asking a bit more about a project in India. And since, well, Local Futures has such a close heart to Ladakh, maybe we can speak about that a bit. And also a question related to what you're saying, like, how do we start? How do we engage local governments, local authorities, support the efforts of to localize and bioregional in a bioregional scale? And I think Ladakh is kind of a success story around community and local governments working together. So if you could share a bit how to start and maybe an example in India.
Okay, so India, there are so many different examples in India, whether I can come up with ones now, but I'd say we, I don't know if the person that wrote the question could be kind enough to put in their email address, and we will send them links to specific and names of projects. And I would also like to defer a bit to a colleague of mine called Alex Jensen, who's knows a lot about, worked a lot in India.
He's here on the chat.
Alex. Is Alex? Oh, Alex, can you please put in? But I'd say India is probably, I don't know, maybe the country that has the most initiatives, I mean, we worked a lot with some good friends at Bhumi College in Bangalore. And Bhumi College has a big kind of student population. People come there to learn about sustainable living, and food is very much at the focus of it. And they, for example, they run farmers markets. They are in contact with local producers, doing a lot of work around traditional seeds, millets, a lot of produce that sort of got lost in the modern society, but that are sort of really the fundament of our food sovereignty, also because it can be grown without agrochemicals and so forth. No? And so that's just one, and they have so many contacts. And another of our good and close friends, Manish Jain from Udaipur, he's also, I mean, he's more involved in the sort of alternatives to mainstream education. But one of the initiatives that he's involved with, which I love, it's called, what's it called? It's
Ecoversity?
Jail University.
Jail University.
Yeah. So actually not Yale, but jail, because he's running these projects in some jails where they are growing food, and the growing of food is both, well, it's very practical, isn't it? It's immediate gratification, but it's also healing on a psychological level, and an emotional level. It's very beautiful. So that's actually, I know of several projects that involve people in prisons that and every single time I hear about them, they have this kind of healing effect, as in, people, both are able to produce some food, often to give to people that are in a worse situation than themselves, and gaining in skill and so forth. That's very inspiring. So I'm hoping, is Alex sharing? Is he on the doing a good?
Yes, he's sharing.
So there's nothing more lovely than lots of brains coming together.
And maybe a bit more about how can we start interacting with local authorities?
Yes.
In their support?
So I would say that every single one of the examples that I have mentioned already are ordinary people that have started and have pushed for change. So it's not like, I mean, I don't think I have mentioned anything that started from the top down, started from the bottom up. Not that we're hoping for both things to happen at the same time. So number one is change the I to a we. Don't try to do it on your own. Join up with other people. It can be, it can be as easy as going to farmers markets and shopping directly from farm, or becoming member of a community cooperative shop, or if there's nothing, start with other people. So I think every single thing that I know about personally is a few people coming together around an idea, and talking it through and starting small. So, for example, the Feria Verde in Costa Rica, which is this farmers market that I mentioned about before, they were a small group of friends that got together, and they're saying, we can't get any decent food in San Jose is the capital. And we really want to buy food from local farmers. So they got together and started, maybe we should set up a little market, and, but then, so they started sort of very practical, and then they set out, and it became sort of, let's just dream. And they said, we want to make the most beautiful market possible. So that was sort of how they started off. They contacted local producers, convinced them to come and sell. It started very small and grew. So I said these 3,000 consumers every week buying from, first it was one, and it was every 2 weeks, or was it every month? I can't remember. Then it became every week, and then it wasn't having, just one wasn't enough, and they started another one in another part of town, and it kind of grew from there. And what happened, if you're interested in this, you can actually go and listen to the podcast, because what happened is exactly as they grew, they became a voice to be reckoned with. So they were reaching out to local politicians. They started advocating for other things, for policy changes, for, cleaner river, for, they do every single time, they do workshops where people come around, they go and do shop for the food, they might eat at the market as well. And you have people sitting around drawing, visions for the future with children. They have talks, they have all sorts of other things. So very often, as you will have seen with a number of them, you become a voice for other things as well, for broader change. I'm not saying that, one start small, but there is, once you have a project in action, and there's an interest in it, it's quite possible to influence policy on a local level. And even, like the network I was talking about that had started in France with these kind of pop-up markets, had a meeting with one of the women that had been involved in it, and they're saying now they feel they want to do more. They want to have a voice. They say we need political change. So how can they move to another level of joining up the voices of all these small and less small hubs to advocate for policy changes, so that we can move away from this, subsidizing the big and deregulating the big, while we overregulate the small and penalize them with heavy taxes, which is the case in many places. And that is a totally unlevel playing field.
And I think the way it's played out, it's like we are so far away from politicians. Like we vote on them, depending on the voting system of each country, but they're kind of so far that it seems like you can't connect with them. But on smaller towns, like in the countryside, you are more close to people who are in the government. But even if you're in a big city, there are many ways to connect with people who are in the government, and especially if you are in a movement and if you have people around you that are working together towards a direction. So here in Brazil, we have many examples of movements that started very little and went worldwide. So there is a movement around land reform as well, and it's called Amazônia de Pé, which is the Amazon standing up. And it's a movement that started with like 3 women coming up together, writing up a bill to reform the lands in the Amazon for indigenous people to work in small communities, small extractive communities of seeds, fruits, nuts and all these types of things, so they could have access to the land, be owners of the land, right? And it started really small, and with community engagement, it's all around Brazil. I was a volunteer, so we would stay in parks and get signatures so the bill would pass. So I think there are many ways, but what you said, it's perfect. Like, it shouldn't feel so big, you cannot touch it, right? So you start small, and then you create momentum by bringing people together.
Yeah, and what I was mentioned, I mentioned quite a lot of initiatives, but the Saikatsu Club, which is not the only one in Japan, the Hansalim in South Korea, with the Saikatsu Club was a single housewife that was outraged by the cost of milk for the children, and she got together with other housewives in 65 to buy directly from milk producers. Hansalim started in the 80s, but it started very small. And now it's a huge movement that is having a political impact. And they, like I say, they campaign, and it's just not just about food, it's about the environment, it's about the climate, it's about, justice, it's about, yeah. So I think what we haven't done and we need to do is to link up more. I mean, that's what we always try sort of to catalyze it with local futures. There's so many things going on. We don't always see each other as part of a global movement, even though we are. If you put all those together, you see there's a real alternatives going on, and it's very important to make that more visible, like I was saying before, and that will give us real strength on many different levels. No? By strengthening local food movements, we are resisting the global corporate economy. But of course, we also have to speak out about these more structural mechanisms that need to change. And even though, I mean, I know it's so difficult to imagine how can we change this global juggernaut, but the first thing we have to do is to articulate what's wrong and pinpoint it. And when enough people do that, there will be, we will be able to make change, but we can't keep quiet.
Perfect. We have to create our own alternatives. If the modernity itself is not creating a space for us to live healthily. Okay, so we are coming to the end. I want you to say final words. I just want to answer people because they're in the chat going crazy if the recording will be shared. So yes, the recording will be shared in about 3 days max, just as for time for us to group, get the recording, edit a little bit and share it with you. So you will receive the recording, and you will also receive a list of the projects. So we're going to save the chat, systematize a little bit. Sorry that the Mentimeter didn't work quite well, which is fine. We have the project right here, and we'll share that with you as well. So I think these are the final, more practical announcements. But please, Anja, if you could close the sessions. We are just 90 minutes now.
Okay, I just want to say thank you to all of you for joining us, and also for sharing. I haven't been able to see the chat while I've been talking away, but I will look forward to doing that. And we are as keen to learn about more initiatives as you are. And yeah, we hope you might join us for the next sessions of this webinar series. The next one will be Eva Henge, who will be addressing, yeah, you're not next actually, yeah, but you will be up soon. And it's, I look forward to that. But yeah, and yes, well, I think that's all for me. I've said enough.
Perfect. If we could all end with a word that summarizes our experience here in the chat, so we get a bit of the vibe that it was. So people are here saying that they really thank you. It was they're really grateful, saying thank you. that it was an informing and inspiring webinar, that are feeling inspired, motivated, that we did a fantastic job, that they feel inspired, that Anja, you were amazing, saying that it was excellent. It was a very educational presentation, very vocal for local futures, gratitude, power to the people, hope and abundance. So I feel like we're ending in this very upward and uplifting vibration.
So I would say just at the end, because I just picked up on the abundance, where I live, we talk about our economy of abundance, which means that all of us, we grow too much, basically. We grow too much food. And so we all constantly saying, oh, I got too many bananas. I got too much of that. Who wants this? What that? We call it our economy of abundance, because it's we always have something to share. We might not have a lot of money, but we always have things to share. And that makes you feel rich in many different ways.
Perfect. So I just wanted to share a bit about the next sessions and then we close.
Oh,
Is
yeah,
that okay?
thank you.
Perfect, because I was a bit wrong on the schedule. So the first session was with Helena. I hoped you guys were able to participate. The one after that was with Camilla. She talked about climate, carbon, and technocracy, which was amazing as well. Anja was there facilitating. Now today, March 5, we talked about local food to survive and thrive with Anja. Next talk is going to be around mental health crisis and what we can do about it with Eva Hench. So please join us. It's going to be on March 20. So you can, in the Local Futures website, and we will be sharing the chat here too. You can register if you haven't registered for all of them. Then it's going to be April 2nd, Renesting Humanity with Darsha. It's amazing work Darsha has won. Everyone who is a mother or who wants to be a mother or is a child should participate into understanding how we nest and take care of our young and how that changes everything. Then it's me. So I was wrong on the schedule. I'm the 16th of April, educating the world we need. So I'm going to be talking about education in this modern world. What are the problems with it? And what are the new movements in education that we can see that are changing? So I saw a few comments here talking about projects that were in local foods in schools and how it's important to work with education in schools. So we'll be talking about that as well. And then we have our final episode, webinars from the webinar series, which is going to be in April 30th, which is True Progress and Restoration of the Whole with Rutendo. So that's our program. I hope you can join us for our next sessions. And thank you so much, everyone, for participating today. Anja, thank you so much for your work and for inspiring.
Thank you all. And I can see there are lots of questions here. You'll all get, I think we can send links to all the previous webinars someone asks in the follow-up email. I think there will be links to all of them. And there was also someone who said, can we create a group? I don't quite know how we can do that, but maybe anyone that wants to be in a group, you can write to us at info@ and we can try to set something up. Right, off I am, very inspired by all this chatting going on, and I'm so glad to see that there are so many out there that are also interested in building local economies and local food economies. Take care, everybody. I'm saying good night from Bornholm in the Baltic Sea.
And I'm saying good afternoon from São Paulo, Brazil. And if you all want to say where you're saying good night or good afternoon from, and we'll meet again in our next webinar series.
Okay, good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.